Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RHE podcast, Respect, Humility, and Empathy. And I am Marshall Law, and I am here with Isaiah Diesel. And today we have Joslin, and we're going to talk
Hi.
about all kinds of interesting issues with her. I just want everybody to know that the time just changed this weekend, and we have Isaiah. It is early a.m. in Korea, where he is at. And I hope he's got some strong coffee because, man, we're ready to rock and roll, but it is early over there.
Hey everyone, this is Isaiah Diesel. I'm trying to wake myself up right now, but it's all good. I'm really happy to be here this morning, and hope that you guys are well out there in the ether with all these vaccines going out. It looks like things are going to get back to normal relatively soon. How are you doing today, Joslin?
Hi guys, thank you for having me.
Actually, I love that name. I have a niece named Joslin. I don't think I've ever met someone with the name Joslin. I think it's a beautiful name.
Thank you.
You have kids yourself?
Yeah. So I have 4 kids. 3, the older 3 are my stepkids. And then the youngest, who is 19 months, is my bio
Wow.
babe. Yeah. So
Bio babe.
it's kind of crazy over here. We're nonstop. And if you can hear them in the background, I apologize.
No, don't. No, kids are the most amazing thing in the universe. Our daughter just turned 3. She was born right in the Olympics, actually.
Aw.
Yeah. In another lifetime, my pre-Christ self was a very bad person, and I was married with her mom, and we were divorced, and I was a very bad husband. And then I moved back to America, and I found Jesus Christ. And after 5 years divorce, I came back to South Korea, and the first night she got pregnant. And then my daughter was
Wow.
born right in the Olympics. So that was like totally special time for a family.
Wow. That's awesome.
Can you just explain a little bit about your faith coming back or
Yeah.
trying to struggle? I know there's never really a straight line that you have. Never. I know for me, my line was like all
Totally.
around, pokey.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'll share, a little bit. So I was born and raised in the Christian church. I mean, when you think about going to church and being that church kid, that was me. Like we eat, sleep, breathe church. My mom was on the church board. We were involved in pretty much everything under the sun as far as church. After church, my mom would have meetings and we'd be hanging out. I just literally grew up in church. So, and loved it. That definitely was a really big part of my family and shaping me into the woman that I am today. I did fall away for a little while in my early 20s. And, made some choices that probably weren't the best, but we live and we learn. And here I am. My husband and I, also very, strong in his faith. And, I think this last year has been very important in our role, with just kind of like what we want out of church or religion, or there's so many words people use. And just I'm not sure as far as like where you are in Korea, how much you know about what's going on in the modern day church over here. The American church, I think, is kind of what it's called. But unfortunately, just not the best stuff when you think of church. And what I mean by that is a lot of hatefulness coming out of the American church, racism, things like that you wouldn't really hope to see coming out of church. And obviously in this day of social media, really we've kind of lost our, I don't want to say filter, but just our common decency of respecting one another. And so you've just seen a lot of stuff going back and forth, and things that, I've seen leaders in church post stuff that I'm like, oh, I don't know if that's really what you should be posting. And then, people say, oh, well, it's just all fun and games, but it's not though. So he and I have really just kind of reworked what our faith is, and kind of had this reformation of our belief system. And yeah, it's been an interesting year, to say the least. I mean, I think COVID brought out the good, bad, and the ugly.
The worst.
Mhm.
One of our first guests that we had was a guy by the name of Mark Madison. He's a singer. And I said, that just gives you an example of how divided our country is. If something like Corona could divide you, something that should unite everybody, you know,
Yeah.
like in South Korea, we're all united to defeat coronavirus. So it's bad, you know. And for me, it's hard associating myself with Christianity when I know what's coming out of there, you know. But I am a missionary. I do follow what's going on back in America, and it's repulsive. I don't
Yeah.
want any part of the racism, of the hatred, of the homophobia. I don't. That's not my brand of Christianity.
Mhm.
I do believe in love,
Yeah.
and I do believe that people need to be called out and stuff. You know, out of
Oh,
love, you need to
absolutely.
call out racism and whatever kind of sexual immoral. I would call sexual immorality. People need to be called on everything, and it needs to be done in love, and to say, hey, I'm gonna cry with you. I'm gonna pray for you. I'm gonna fast with you. I'm gonna do my best to try to see you come out of where you're at right now. And I don't see that. I see it's I'm better than you, and you guys are destroying the country and the world, and it's just not what I want to be
Yeah.
involved with. But
Yeah.
Marshall, you got an opinion?
Yeah, I mean, my take on this is a lot of Americans, in my opinion, are what I call functional atheists. In other words, they claim to be believers. They might have the cross around their neck or something. They carry the Bible. They go to church on Wednesday and Sunday, but then at all other times they act as if there is no such thing as God. They
Mhm.
engage in a sexual immorality.
Hmm.
They do all kinds of other things that is essentially expressly and explicitly forbidden by the faith. And this is kind of universal amongst all faiths. There are certain rules and guidelines that are universal, and you don't see them following those.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, are you an atheist, or are you only a Sunday Christian, or what's going on here with your
Weekend
faith?
warrior.
You know, well,
Weekend warrior.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. You know, and I think that discourages a lot of people. It turns a lot of people off. And all I can say is we have to pursue the truth, right? And
Hmm.
if God is real, if God is true, we can't let the hypocrites put us off our journey, because
Right.
the
Mhm.
world is filled with hypocrites. And frankly, from a Christian perspective, everyone is a hypocrite, because
Yeah,
we all
absolutely.
fall short at some point, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
But the difference is the attitude that we have to when we fall short. If we express remorse for the times we fall short, and we reform our lives and make different choices, then we're fine. I mean, look at Paul, right? Who was a great persecutor of Christians. So there's redemption for people, but I see a lot of people who make this claim, oh, I'm a big Christian, and they put the little fish logo on their car or whatever it may be. They really like to like put it out there, but then they just don't behave that way. Their attitude,
Yeah.
their demeanor towards others isn't that way. And
Right.
I have found the best Christians often are people who have had a winding faith journey, as you
Hmm.
expressed it, Isaiah, like this. I really think that there is something transformational about going through that and then coming out on the other side.
Right. Right.
To me, that's what it means to be born again. To be born again is not, oh, I went to church and was saved, and therefore I'm born again. No, I think to be born again is to actually descend into hell for 3 days and then
Yeah.
to emerge with the gospel,
Seriously.
you know?
Seriously.
And that's the atheist take. So if the atheist sees that, certainly the
Yeah.
other Christians around you are seeing it. So all I want to say is those folks aren't fooling anyone.
That's good.
This podcast is not primarily about religion. We are going to talk about racial issues today, but I do want to say that, first of all, Marshall is 100% right, and it's always been my opinion that atheists understand the Christian message a lot better than Christians do. Not every time, but a lot of Christians just do not get some of the most basic things that Jesus Christ was talking about. And that being said, is that you and I, we're if we're on if we've been away and we're coming to Christ, there's a refining process, and we're continually learning stuff. Over the last year, I've learned more than I have probably in my whole life being a believer. So in the last 7 years since I've been a believer, and so we're continually learning things. And I think one of the things we got to learn the most is how much of a hypocrite we actually are. Like, I'll be the first to say I'm the biggest hypocrite that I know. You know, and a lot of people won't admit that. I admit it. I recognize it, and I understand my inclination is not to do good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly having to check myself because I used to have a Dodge Neon. That thing was a piece of garbage, man. And the suspension was so off, and I'd drive it, it would constantly veer to the right. And I had to keep that thing in check. Otherwise, I'd run off the road. And so that's like what I am in the reality of who I am, is that, and I recognize it. I don't try to deny it or run away from it. I recognize that I'm not inclined to do good. In fact, we're going to talk today about race. I'm going to say flat out, not a lot of people admit this, but I am inclined to have racial bias, and I got to keep that side of myself in check, you know, and I hate it.
Yeah.
I am the father of a half biracial child, and I am a minority myself, but I recognize I have inclinations that are not at all what I want to teach my daughter, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Any chance you've ever seen Beavis and Butthead?
No.
No? Do you know what it is?
Yeah, I totally know what it is.
Well, whenever you watch this, I'm going to put an infographic of Mr. Anderson, and do not tell me that Marshall does not look like Mr. Anderson.
I don't know.
Marshall?
Guilty.
He's a cartoon character. You know what? Joslin, before we get started, we want to hit you with a little rapid fire, little friendly fire, just to kind of gauge you and ask a few questions about you. But here we go. What is your children's favorite cereal?
Cinnamon Life.
I miss those kind of things. Those little things you can't get in South Korea. I'm like, oh, life. Oh, so good.
Well, since we're thinking about coffee today, I was going to say this morning. It's morning for Isaiah. It's afternoon for us. But what creamer do you put in your coffee?
So right now I'm obsessed with this oat milk brown sugar. Obsessed.
Oh my gosh.
Dairy lactose intolerant over here.
Oh.
So, yeah, I've got to get the oat milk, but it's brown sugar flavored creamer. It's incredible.
Wow.
That sounds great. We were just talking about Irish cream and the other ones that we just can't get here in South. Like, there's a lot of Western stuff we just can't get here, like Twinkies, Doritos. Out of the question. Yeah, I got a really quick funny story. When I went back, I was obsessed with Twinkies. So I would be, and I had jet lag, so I'd be going there at 4 o'clock in the morning to buy Twinkies. And after about a week, the lady was looking at me, and she was like, and I'm like, hey, I live in South Korea, and I have jet lag, and I haven't eaten these in like a year. And she's like, oh, I just thought you were a pothead.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. So let's see. Here's another one. So what's an ideal date night for you and your husband?
Oh gosh, pre-COVID or since COVID? Pre-COVID, it would be going out of the house, getting dressed up. And now it's not having the kids in my house, sending them off to grandma and grandpa's so we can sleep in the morning.
What's the last book you've read?
Ooh, what is a good book? Like, you know, weighty book. I was reading, it's called Reading While Black. And then fun book was the Bridgerton series. So
there you go.
Depends on.
What's the Bridgerton series?
It's based off of a Netflix. Well, let me rephrase that. The Netflix series is based off of a book, this book series.
Okay.
So it's like a girl book, romance novel.
Last question. Besides Tupac, because Tupac is everybody's favorite rapper, but who's your favorite rapper of all time?
Oh.
Marshall, you know what rap is, right?
I don't even listen to rap.
Isn't that where you like knock on the door?
Yeah.
It's an old, right? I'm rapping on the door, or is it what you do with Christmas presents, right? I like it.
That's
when
what
you
I
have
was thinking.
The big bow and the shiny wrapping paper. It's like foil, the metallic wrapping paper, really super cool.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say I grew up in church, so I wasn't allowed to listen to rap. I mean, the first person that popped in my head was DC Talk. So
Oh,
there
okay,
you go.
okay. In another lifetime, I actually had hair. It's a really long time ago. And if you can believe it or not, this head would support Coolio dreads. And I used to rap, I used to cut demos, and
That's
man,
funny.
it was pathetic. It was a pathetic stage of my life. I used to wear my clothes backwards, like crisscross.
Oh,
Like,
heck
it was bad.
yeah.
So Marshall, do you have a favorite rapper?
Oh gosh, there's a number of them. I think Eminem is
I
actually
knew you
rather
were going to say
talented.
that. I feel like I knew you were
Yeah.
going to say Eminem.
Well, I like his first name, Marshall.
Mar-
So,
There you go. Marshall Mathers.
He's
yeah.
very biased. You know what? Speaking of which, this is a good little segue with that, because I think this is a classic example of how we have biases that we either don't recognize them
Mm.
or we're just hypocritical. Like we
Mhm.
like to think our poop doesn't stink. But think about this: a lot of people were giving a lot of rappers, a lot of black rappers were giving, they were giving him troubles for being a rapper, and saying that he was doing something equivalent to Elvis Presley when he was basically taking black music and using it for himself, and
Mm.
he was accused, I don't know, cultural appropriation. I think that is just so ridiculous. If somebody has a talent, they have a talent. That guy clearly, I would never even say he's a tenth of Tupac Shakur, but he certainly was better than most rappers that were out. So that's a little kind of way that people, if you're saying like one thing's okay for this person and it's not okay for this other person, then that is a form of racism, period.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Who are you asking?
You go, Marshall. You jump in.
Marshall's opinion really doesn't matter to me. So I
I think it depends. To me, racism is it's embedded in power systems, which makes me by default, unfortunately, a racist. Even though I'm technically not a racist, I technically am. Like, I have no problem with having neighbors or people in my life who are of color. I don't have any issue with it, and I find it to be ridiculous that somebody would have an issue over the level of melanin in your skin. I mean, I just find that flat out absurd. But at the same time, as a Caucasian man, I benefit from institutions of power that are built upon centuries of discrimination and racism. I benefit in ways that I don't even know, that I can't even appreciate. And that's the problem. I don't know. But I just know that I do. I know that I am. I know that my wages at work are higher because of the color of my skin. I know that every time I've been stopped by a police officer and let go with a warning, because I was speeding or something, that there's something to all of this. The fact that I don't have to worry or even think about certain scenarios when I walk down the street or visit a particular area. Whereas if you are female, or if you are a person of color, you have to think about all these different possible threat scenarios that I don't even imagine.
Yeah.
And I benefit from that. It's great on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's a tremendous injustice that everyone doesn't have that same feeling of safety. They don't get those passes that I get in life. They don't get paid what I get paid. They don't get the privilege. The color of my skin does not make my life harder. So the thing is I think racism is the institutional side of prejudice. I think a lot of people struggle with prejudice. I think there's something natural there.
Correct.
We,
Yep.
as humans, are inherently tribal, so we have prejudice against any kind of outsiders. Joslin and I live in a community somewhat close knit. It's not always, we have our internal issues here in our community. She laughs because she knows, but at the same time, there's definitely an us versus the outsiders notion. Like, if people from another community were to come to our park care, somebody would complain about it. I would bet, there would be
Karen?
some concern.
Probably, they get Karen. We got to turn that into a verb.
They might get Karen'd, to
Yeah.
say the least. Yeah.
We got to
So,
put that. We got to put that in the book. You know, every year they add words like, if that happens to you, you just got Karen'd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joslin, have you ever been Karen'd?
Have I? Oh gosh, yeah. Oh yeah. I was in
You're like,
management.
just 2 times last week.
I was in management, so you always get Karen'd when you're in
Wow.
management.
Joslin, you look a few shades darker than me, and I'm Mexican. So,
Yeah.
can we ask you your background?
Yeah, so my mom is French and Norwegian, and then my dad is African American, whatever. He's mixed with quite a bit, actually. Yeah, I've done that 23andMe, the DNA thing, and I actually have Irish in me, so I can actually say I'm Black Irish, which is kind of a cool thing.
You know what? I'm glad you mentioned that, because anybody who takes that realizes that they think, oh yeah, I'm Black, or
Oh yeah,
I'm white, and like, no, you're not. You're at best a mix. You're a mutt. Everybody's a mutt, you know.
100%.
And for me, I am Mexican, which means by definition I'm a mutt of Spanish and Native American. And then you have my daughter, who's full Korean or half Korean. Her mom's full Korean, and they're a very homogenous people. They don't like really marry outside. It's not really seen as a good thing. So you have that element. So everybody's going to be racist in some regards or another, but South Koreans are a lot more open about their racism, like a lot more open about it. And I want to tell you another story about myself real quick before we get started and asking you the questions we have for you. But so I went into Palestine, and I want to show you a picture of myself here. That's me. Yeah, I look like a full on out like Taliban member right here. But
Yeah.
I was there, and I went and I stayed in a mosque there for about a week, and I saw just how amazingly loving and kind that these people were. And some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Some of my fondest memories was in that mosque. And I found that these people were a lot more loving than the Christians I've ever encountered. And yet on my way out of there, I sat down, and there were some guys, and we were smoking something in between like marijuana and cigarettes, something in between there. I don't really know what it was, but I was not a believer. I was definitely not a believer, but out the corner of my eye, I saw this guy pull out an axe behind me. And in 2 seconds, I thought, oh my God, this is the last breath I'm ever going to take. I'm like, this has been fun, but I'm done. And he pulled out the axe and he walked right behind me, and then he started chopping some wood. And I was like, oh my God, but that was just this bias that I have,
Yeah.
And it's hard not to be when you're watching movies and you're seeing bias about, you think this person is just like, these guys are all terrorists. They're just running around blowing each other up inside of and the average person is just walking down the street, just smoking hookah, smoking cigarettes, goatees like me. They had their beards, but they had their like little goatees. You had women with colorful hijabs. They were just your average people, like you would see in like a ghetto in America. Like I couldn't believe how normal they were. But that being said, we want to ask you a few questions here. First question is, how do you raise your kid to embrace both sides of a race? Well, I guess you're still in the process right now, but maybe because your child still doesn't know that, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the dynamics of having I don't like to think of the term step. It's like either you're their mom or you're not,
Yeah.
So I'm sure you see it the same way, but how is that dynamics for you?
Yeah, so we actually this last year I've actually talked a lot about race. We have a sign in our front yard that it really is just an all-inclusive. It says love is love. We believe no human is illegal. We believe all lives matter. We believe Black lives matter. It's like this just whole all-encompassing sign. And when we put it up, we kind of talked with the kids about it and why we felt the need that it was important to put it in our front yard. And
that's awesome.
we talked a lot about racism, because obviously that's been a big hot topic this last year. Like it's either the church, COVID, or racism, one of those three that you find yourself talking about lately. And so, for me, obviously my kids see me as a different color than them. And we talk about it. We bring up books that are incorporated with Black culture, and we talk about different movies. I've had them watch movies such as Bridges, and just a couple other movies that really talk about the history of the African American culture, and just open up that dialogue for them, because for me it's important that my kids hear it from me, because if they don't hear it from me, they're going to hear it from someone. And I would hate for their narrative to be from another child that doesn't have maybe exposure to someone who is Black, or someone who's biracial, or a minority. And where we live in a pretty small town, where I grew up in a small town, was very predominantly white. So just being able to expose my kids to different cultures and talk about things and have open dialogue for them is really important.
I'm kind of curious about this because I mentioned about how I can go places and do things and not really bat an eye about it. But I imagine that's different for you, both as a woman and as a person of color. Can you talk about that a little bit? And we come from this community in Central California on the coast, which is actually kind of upscale and nice. Are there still concerns? I mean,
Yeah.
pauses, things that make you pause, or do you have to think
Yeah.
twice? What do you have to think about?
Yeah. So actually, well, even now, but a lot more when I first became my stepmom to my kids. Obviously, they don't look like me. And when we would go out, I would get a lot of looks, especially. So the youngest was 2 when I came into her life. So
Wow.
she's pretty much called me mommy. They all three of them
Wow.
call me mommy,
Wow.
but she has always called me mommy. And so I get a lot of weird looks because they don't actually look like me. And so I get a lot of side glances. And there was this one time we were at a restaurant in our small town, and I won't say the name of it. But we were getting breakfast, and there was a wait when we came in, and I put our name on the list, and she sat 3 other people before us. And I went up and I said, "Excuse me, I'm just wondering, like, how much longer?" Because I'm pretty sure that they came in after I did. And she said, "I'm not really sure how much longer." And I said, "Well, can you check? My kids are hungry." And her response was, yeah, it was very dismissive, and I can't remember the exact words, but it was kind of like, "Yeah, sure, I'll check," or like, "Hold on," or something dismissive. I went back to the kids, and I mean, you'd be surprised what kids pick up, but they were like, Why was she mean to you, mommy? Why was she mean?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know, just trying to blow it off." And then she did come back, and she's like, "Your table's ready." And she put us in the very back corner. And, I try not to let my anger show through. I'm a very passionate person, so I try not to let my passion show through to the kids. But she did put us in the back. I think maybe she she took our order, dropped our food, and I think that was it. And so, it is hard because I do still experience those type of responses. And, it's hard not, some people would say, "Well, I'm sure it wasn't because you were Black, you're reading into it." Well, maybe, but I can tell you that the 3 other people that she sat before me were white. 2 of them were older white men, and one of them was a family. So, it wasn't like there was no table. It wasn't a busy restaurant
Right.
either. So, I mean, there's things like that. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating.
Or have you ever experienced some kind of racism before, or some either just flat out racism,
Oh,
or
yeah.
just racism directed like
Oh yeah.
directly at you, or
Oh
just
yeah.
seen it? Could you
My
just,
whole
I
life.
mean, like a
I
lot,
don't
like
like
frequently?
um frequently enough. I mean, I can name a couple instances. The first one that comes to mind was in high school,
Hmm.
where we were walking across, it's called the quad, where it's like the pavement, and walking to another class. Junior year of high school, someone made the comment behind me, if I had a nickel for every Black person I drug behind my truck, I'd be the richest man in the world. Um,
Wow.
I was
Wow.
in airport in Atlanta, Georgia, um, waiting for my connecting flight at those little kiosk bookstore things, and picked up there was a Nicholas Sparks book that had just been released, picked it up, standing there waiting for my connecting flight, skimming through it, reading, like pretty much everyone does. And the worker came over to me and asked me if I was going to buy the book. And I told her no, that I was just looking at it. And she told me I needed to put the book down if I wasn't going to buy it, and that I couldn't stand there and read it. And I remember being like, why can't I stand here and read it? And she said, because you have to buy it. And I said, so all of these people that are looking at books have to buy their books? Like, I don't understand. And she basically was just like, you need to put it down or you need to buy it, and was raising her voice. And now there was a scene. So I just put the book down and walked out of the store.
You,
I mean, I've had restaurants where my boyfriend, who was white at the time, well, my husband's white, but my boyfriend at the time was also white, and um, they said that they couldn't seat us. I've had someone sitting next to us say, look, he's dating a Black girl. I mean, I could go
wow.
on and on and on and
Wow.
on.
So I grew up, you know, Bakersfield.
Oh yes.
So I grew up in Bakersfield. Marshall and I, we both grew up in Bakersfield, and I live on the east side. And so there's actually a mix of Blacks, whites, and Mexicans there. So one thing we have in common is that we're all poor. So, but growing up, there was this kid, and the guy's married to a Mexican girl now. So I really can't hold anything, like whatever you're doing in middle school or elementary. It's ridiculous. I wouldn't want to be held to stuff I was doing even in college, you know, or even into my 30s. I had a lot of crap in my head, but he used to call us a wetback, and uh, he was obsessed with playing Blacks and Mexicans against whites for sports. And it was probably the stupidest thing you could have done, because we were always killing. I mean, there was in the sport, even soccer. It didn't even. I'm like, you think you guys are gonna beat a bunch of Mexicans playing soccer? Like, seriously? Like, so we'd beat him every day, and it wasn't even relevant. It wasn't even relevant that we beat him. They just didn't want to play with us. And from what I know about him now, from having talked to him, was that stuff was like taught as a kid to him, you know.
Yeah.
And I think as an adult, he did get over it. And I know this because he has a Mexican wife now. But it's one of those things that made me absolutely hate being a Mexican growing up.
Mhm.
And I really did. I used to visualize myself having blonde hair and blue eyes, and I thought white was like the
Same.
only beautiful standard. And speaking of which, so I do want to tell you something, that the day after Trump got elected, I was driving over in Oildale, and
Ooh.
and yeah, and someone I just heard driving zoom past me say "wetback," and I was like, man, I have not been called that since like or actually elementary. And that's probably the last time. But I don't use those kind of slurs to attack people, but as I said, I think there's a lot more kind of subtle racism that I have inside of myself that I'm constantly trying to keep in check, because it's not something I want my daughter to learn.
Right.
And as a half biracial child here, she's prone to that. You know, she's prone to receive that. So if I don't want my daughter to receive it, I can't give it to someone else. And
Mhm.
so they're seen like as like half-blooded, like unpure, because they put a lot of emphasis on not interbreeding here. It's a hard thing, but you know, I think it's something we got to be aware of, how we can be inclined to that. Do you ever find yourself practicing in, like, I would call it like covert racism? No one wants to be an overt racist, But do you ever feel yourself with prejudices like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has prejudices. And I think that's honestly part of the problem is no one wants to admit that they actually,
Right.
in fact, do have those issues. I mean,
Hmm.
I think, as Christians, if we want to take it back to that, is we live in a fallen world. So
Yeah.
I mean, we have hate
Hmm.
embedded into our lives, unfortunately. And I think that, I mean, people talk about like unity and all of this stuff. And yeah, I mean, I've kind of sidebarring, but I remember people were like, well, after 9/11 happened, we were the most unified ever, which is a bunch of crap
Hmm.
because we were not unified. Because I bet you if you ask, Islamic people that lived here, or
Hmm.
I, so all of these people, we weren't unified towards them. I mean, they were being
Hmm.
attacked. And so
Hmm.
it's funny because I don't think we'll ever be unified. I just don't, because
Right.
unfortunately we live in a fallen world, and I think
Hmm.
that that's just a part of uh, sin, really. But
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
back to
It
your
is. It is.
question, I mean, yeah, I mean, I definitely, I've had prejudices against even Black people, and I'm half
Hmm.
Black. So,
Hmm.
and I think because I grew up in a predominantly white area, so that's what I was around. I didn't know
Hmm.
any
Hmm.
different.
Hmm.
Well, I think what strikes me by what you described previously is, I call it, I guess, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. You talked about how you experience racism, and it seems like it's frequent, but it's kind of low grade. It's kind of like this little thing. It's not like a police officer shoots you or puts cuffs on you during a routine traffic stop kind of thing that makes the
Right.
headlines. It's like, people giving you those looks or those glances or the snide remarks. And it's like, it's not really worth my time and energy to even acknowledge it. But at the same time, doesn't that take a toll? And how do you cope? I mean, that's got to be a burden. Is it a burden? And how do you cope with that?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. I think for a really
Oh, I don't have
long
good
time.
questions. I don't have good questions.
Your
No,
questions are, of
Isaiah, you
course,
don't.
good.
But anyway.
I think
I'm trying
for
to use. I'm trying to use a little comedy. It's kind of a serious issue, so I hope you
no,
don't
it's
mind.
good. No, it's good. Yeah, I think for a long time I basically would just not ignore it, but push it under the rug. I would not make a big deal about it. I wouldn't bring it up because all of my friends are white and I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable.
Mm,
And
mm,
my whole family's
mm,
white. The family I grew up with is white, and I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. So I think for a long time, I just really would, when stuff like that would come up, I would ignore it or just try to, if it came up in conversation, I would try not to engage or look away so someone wouldn't call on me to like talk about it. But this last year, and actually the birth of my son, when I found out I was pregnant, I it was a really big awakening for me, in the sense that there was a very real chance that um, my son was going to look like me and have brown skin, and that he'd be cute when he was little, but then as he got older, he'd be seen as a threat. And so we were going to have to raise him different than we were raising our other
mm,
two
mm,
boys who are white passing. And that's when it started clicking for me. And then um,
mm,
right after my son was born, there was the whole thing that happened right at the beginning of the year. And just how I mean, it was Ahmaud Aubrey. I mean, it was just one thing after another. Breonna Taylor,
mhm,
and it.
mhm,
I kind of had a breakdown. I mean, granted, I was stuck in my house, but I think it was also just the culmination of everything, one right after another, and I felt like I needed to start speaking up because I could no longer. I could no longer be concerned about how I made others feel, when I
Wow,
was
wow,
feeling a specific way.
wow. That is, so you're essentially kind of have a similar situation as that Meghan Markle,
Yeah,
when the
actually.
family was like obsessed with about if the baby was going to turn out like darker. You know, that was
Yeah,
I wish I could say I was somewhat surprised or
surprised.
stunned, but I wasn't in the
Yeah.
slightest sense of the word surprised that she. And actually, I had no idea she was half black. Not a
Yeah.
single idea that until I started until that interview. You know, because
Yeah.
first of all, I really do not care in the slightest sense about like a royal family. They're just a family.
Yeah.
That family happened to steal power from you. You know, that there's nothing intrinsically like
Right.
unique or royal about them. But the fact that that was an issue for them just shows you how much farther we still got to go as a,
Hmm.
not just as a society, just as a people. You know, because I think you're certainly going to encounter racism no matter where you are. I mean,
Yeah.
I was down in Haiti. I was down in Haiti doing volunteer work after the earthquake, and the people there are black. You know,
Hmm.
but the mulattoes down there are basically like descendants of the slave masters who would purposely impregnate their slaves and have like
Yeah.
mulattoes. And
Well,
this was like a
and
ruling
just to
class.
clarify, when you say purposely impregnate, you mean rape? They're house slaves.
I'm
Like,
so I'm not entirely sure if it was rape
oh,
or they.
you know that I've done a lot of research for that, and it's they would rape there. That's why I can say I have Irish in me. It would be from my slave owners, and that's why I am light skinned, is because if you trace it back to my heritage, I can be. Oh, I would have been, lighter skin would be a house slave, because
Yeah,
But
yeah. So I'm sorry. So the point is that even inside of the realm of the people there who you think, hey, we're all like poor here, um, we're all having natural disasters and we're all struggling. Like there was still a lot of racism going on there
mhm,
amongst the own people. So when I saw that, and I saw that they had a word which is called Congo, which is basically like a country bumpkin
mhm,
for other blacks who like lived out in the countryside. Like there's still racism that was going on there that I got to see, and I did it, and then I just started researching the history and saw the kind of stuff that was happening. It's really just, I actually wrote a book about it. It's called Haiti Unforgotten. But I
mm,
did talk about the history of all that, the slavery, and it was really disturbing though to see it firsthand. You know that this stuff is still alive and well, and we're all like everyone is subjected to it in one way or the other. So actually, that's my next question. Actually, is this is how do we truly achieve a colorblind society, and is that even possible or a good thing?
I think the word colorblind is probably not the correct word to use. I think culture conscious would be a better word, because um, a lot of people are like, well, I don't really see color. And I think when people say that, that's kind of the issue. Like, you should see
Mm,
that I am brown skin, and we should celebrate my brown skin and my culture. So, I don't think that colorblind equals acceptance. And
mm,
sometimes I think people think that that's what it means. And so, yeah, the word that I've been trying to say to people when they say, "Oh, well, I'm colorblind," it's like, you should be culture conscious. You should be conscious of the
mm,
different cultures that we have, and accept it. So, um, to answer your question, I don't really think that a colorblind society is what we want. I mean, we all are made uniquely. We all have
mhm.
different cultures and things that make us special and unique. And so I think if we don't acknowledge that, then we're not acknowledging our uniqueness and what makes us special. And we'd all just kind of be the same. And that's not really fun.
Mhm. What is something you want us to know And I'm thinking with regards to all these experiences that you've had, what I think the correct term for it are microaggressions, you know, and a lot of them apparently. What is something you want us to know with regards to these microaggressions?
People might think it's not a big deal, or it's not racism, but it is, because in the sense that I'm affected by what you're saying or doing. I think sometimes everyone's quick to talk about, everyone's so sensitive, but when you are ignoring someone or making a judgment based off of what someone looks like or what you think they are, I that's, it's hard. I mean, I think we need to get past that. Another one kind of came to mind. I was 7 months pregnant, and I was huge. And I had the 3 kids, and we were at the grocery store, and I'm checking out, and this is at a very local, well-known grocery store in my small town. And she asked if I was going to be paying with EBT.
Oh.
I didn't even know what it was. I said,
God.
"What? I'm sorry." And she said, "Are you going to be paying with EBT?" And I was thinking debit. And so I was like, "Yeah, or credit." And she like looked at me and she said, "Never mind." And then when I got to my car, I realized,
Googled it.
oh my gosh. No, then it registered. I was like, she thought I was on welfare because I had 3 kids and I was pregnant. Like, oh, and black. Like, what? Like, I was shook. I was so offended. I wanted to go back in there. But, obviously, but that's what I mean. Like, it's that passing of a judgment based off of what I look like or what she thinks she sees. And I want people to be aware that that's racism. That's
absolutely
prejudice. And that's what needs to change.
And there should be no shame. There should be no shame attached to EBT.
Correct.
To getting food assistance, because that's 100%. Why the program is there.
It's existing.
People of all races take advantage of it. We all pay into it with our taxes. We actually pay very little. It's like $1 or something we all pay every month or whatever. It's crazy little how much we pay to it. So it's not like it's costing us that much. We have an abundance of food, and I want to share that abundance with people, regardless. If a person isn't working and they could be working, there's something going on, and I want them to get help. They need treatment, not shame.
Right.
And if a person, and there's also a lot of people who are working, they're working full time, and they still qualify for EBT. And that's because we haven't updated the laws in this country to require that corporations and other businesses pay living wages to people. So
especially
it's
where we
not,
live.
yes, it's not the individual's fault in all cases. And even if it is their fault, then there's something else going on. But the thing that's not going to make it better is the shaming. That makes me angry.
Yeah.
And that needs to not happen, obviously. But
do you feel that people can get overboard with the being racially sensitive? Because I am under the persuasion that there's no single one thing we can do to end racism. But I think one of the things we can do is to not, first of all, not call things out that aren't racist. Because when you start to do that, you start to get people in a situation where they just don't want to hear about the race anymore. And I totally understand that. When you're calling stuff racism that is maybe just stereotypical, that you might, say something and you say, "Oh, well, you're a racist." Well, no, you're not. You're just making like an observation about something. So I think one of the ways we could, and there's many dozens, hundreds maybe of things we can do, is one is to not be so sensitive about things, and 2, allow people like Russell Peters?
Mm-mm.
Okay, he's a Canadian Indian comedian, and basically think of like a Chris Rock, but for Indian people.
Okay.
Or Manaj Hassan. He's like basically the Chris Rock of like Arabics,
Okay.
Arabic people. And so they just kind of throw everything out there, like, hey, let's laugh about these issues. Let's be equal in our distribution of jokes to everybody. So everybody's fair game. And to me, it's been good hearing like an Arabic person get up there and say, make these jokes about his own people, and where there's Chris Rock and making observations, like I think I was telling Marshall about this. One of the most brilliant commentaries I've ever heard Chris Rock say was that he said he was joking that Black people never get held hostage because they make bad bargaining chips. And so it was like a subtle Black Lives Matter way before Black Lives Matter was about, he made it in a funny way, but it's a real social commentary to say, like Black lives simply do not matter the same way, that
Right.
There's no way to get around that. We could try to say all lives matter, but and I think there was a little bit of misbranding for the Black Lives Matter, because what they should have been saying is Black lives matter equally. So I do think that they phrase themselves totally wrong. But that, what do you think about little small things that we could do, as I said, about not wanting to see people crucified over every remark? Do you think that has any kind of validity?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's hard because I don't, when you're telling someone that they should not be offended, I kind of struggle with that, because I don't think you should ever invalidate someone's feelings. That's how they feel. That's how they feel. I mean, that's like if my kids, one of the kids picks on the other kids and I say, well, you shouldn't feel upset. Well, they do feel upset. So I think we need to acknowledge that, hey, maybe you meant that in a joke, but it did offend someone. And so you do need to acknowledge that feeling. Now, if you're talking about the cancel culture, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we need to educate, because obviously there's a reason why. I mean, for the most part, when people say things, that they're speaking out of a place of not knowing, or not truly understanding. And so being able to educate them on why that could be offensive, or why that is offensive, I think is important. But I think telling people that they shouldn't be offended, it's not fair, because that is someone's feelings. That is how they feel. It's a justified feeling for them. And I know a lot of times people, use the argument, well, Black people say the N-word, and I think it's just as wrong when a Black person says the N-word as I do when a white person says the N-word. I think the term itself is derogatory, and it's rooted in hate. And so I think if we can start educating people on why that's not acceptable, or why that shouldn't be socially acceptable, or why that is offensive, then I think when we start approaching each other from that sense of like having awareness of the deeper rooted issue, then hopefully that can subside.
I do want to address this head on, and I want to throw out there that I think there are things that are racist that we wouldn't even realize are racist. Like, because what I explained at the beginning of the show is racism is institutional. It's institutionalized. It's embedded into the very fabric and framework of our society. Like, for example, grade levels. You're like, what do you mean grade levels? Grade levels is just a grade level, right? But this idea that everybody should fall in this narrow stochastic range of performance, and that the majority of people upon which this range is pegged are Caucasians. And then when you have underserved school districts with minority populations, and so they're always going to fall beneath those medians in those ranges, and then you draw conclusions and you make policy, but it's not like necessarily good policy. You say, well, these kids are the gifted kids, so we're going to lavish them with gifted teachers, specialized teachers to help them perform. But this great mass of kids who perform below that median, well, we're just, we have general and basic math for them instead of algebra or whatever. Things like that, I think, are racist, and nobody bats an eye because it's just ingrained into our society. We don't think that everything around us could be racist. The architecture around us could have racist elements, and we're just oblivious to it. The architecture. And I think that's why I like it when people call things out, because it helps to open my eyes.
Yeah.
So I kind of appreciate this oversensitivity, this hypersensitivity that seems to be going on. And, you know, the whole idea of cultural appropriation. So when somebody calls something out, it says, wait, that belongs to my culture. What are you doing with it? It makes me think. You know, and I think that's a great exercise, and I think we need a lot more of it. You know, as far as the whole cancel culture, I think there's consequences. You make choices, there are consequences for those choices. And I don't think that all the cancel culture has produced negative consequences for people. Some of these people who've been canceled have seen their sales increased of
Right.
their
That's very
albums and
true.
books and other things. They're actually making bank off of
Yeah.
cancel culture. So before we decry cancel culture, I think what we really need to do is think about what these voices are telling us. We need to listen to those voices. And I just think that that's my take on that. I think that's critical to education, is listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
So Marshall, I'm going to completely disagree in one respect, that racism, if you get down to what the root of racism is, okay, racism is by definition either decreasing the value of someone else or increasing the value of someone else based solely on their skin. Okay, so in that sense, do institutions do it? Absolutely. Anybody who doesn't see that is simply not being objective. Okay, so there is an institutional element of it that's just ingrained into society. But one, there's also racism that people do on a daily basis, whether they're not gonna, whether even if they wouldn't date a certain race, or if they walk to the other side of the street when they see someone. So I have heard Black people argue that they can't be racist because they don't have the institutions, they don't have control of institutions to wield it to show discrimination. But that doesn't mean that Black people aren't capable of being racist. Because I see,
prejudice.
I mean,
it's prejudice, not racism. And I think that's what people get hung up on. And I think that's where people are like, well, you can be racist and be a Black person. You can be prejudiced and be a Black person. The racism is rooted, it's the systemic, our whole culture was based off of, you know, white superiority. So that is racism. But prejudice is, I don't like this white person because they're X, Y, and Z, or I don't like Hispanics because of X, Y, and Z. And that's prejudice. And I think that's where people really get hung up is they're like, well, it's reverse racism. No, it's prejudice. So I think if people can understand the difference between those two meanings, then it goes back to everyone has prejudice in them. However, racism it's different.
So I just have to say I very strongly disagree with that. But I mean, this is what this podcast is for. It's not that we agree or disagree on everything. You know, actually, that's why we have 3 letters in this podcast: it's respect, humility, and empathy. And so I think empathy is the basis. Empathy at the basic level would eliminate any kind of racism or prejudice. Let's not get caught up on those 2 categories for a second, but because I would say I think there's a semantical argument that we would disagree on that one. But at the end of the day, nobody wants to be treated differently than another person based on nothing that they have control over. Okay, so if you don't want that done for you, like I don't want that done as an American here. I experienced racism as an American, you know?
Yeah.
It's like here they have no ability to distinguish that I'm Mexican. It's such a funny thing because, like, you know, you might walk into a store in America and get like some odd looks at you because I'm bald and have facial hair, you know, even though I've traveled over the world, I'm educated, you know, but people just see, oh, I look like a common thug. And I get that. I totally understand that. I mean, if I were to see me walking down a dark alley, I'd be afraid of me. That's just the truth, you know? I mean, that's bald. I lost all my hair. It's like, I lost my hair at the age of 25 years old, man. It's hard.
Isaiah
Sorry, man.
scares himself looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
So,
My dad's 70 years old and he has every ounce of his hair, but I just happen to lose all mine. And I don't know. Actually, we had a white guest on here, and he was talking about he's bald, and he's like, "Hey, some people see me, I look like a skinhead or whatever, you know." And so it's just a reality, things that happen like that. But on a personal level, is I know what it's like to experience it, and I know that my daughter. There's no way of getting around this. My daughter's going to be subjected to racism here. I've already experienced it. If I walk into a place with her, people are going to know this is a half Korean. You just take one look at her eyes, and the first thing any Korean says when they see her is like, "Oh, your daughter's eyes are so big," because they all get the plastic surgery because they don't like having smaller eyes, you know.
Yeah.
That's some people will say, "Oh, that's racist." But no, they have smaller eyes. They have it has to do with the way that their eyes, the skin on their eyes. They have surgery. They remove part of it so that they have what is like a double eyelid. And so when they see my daughter, they say, "Oh, she has like such big eyes." But you're gonna take one look at my daughter and know that she's not fully Korean. So even though we gave her like a Korean name, we specifically gave her a Korean name so that at least like you couldn't take a look at her card and see that, you know. Her name is Leah. American word put into Korean words. It's not a Korean name, but point is that the most basic part of empathy is not wanting something done to you, so not doing the same exact thing as someone else. And Christ taught this. Christ taught empathy, and so that's where we need to be. We're not subjecting people to treatment that we wouldn't want to be subjected to ourselves. Period. Doesn't matter if you're in the government. It doesn't matter if it's you're on the street. It doesn't matter if you're at work or anywhere. So I think the E in empathy for RHE podcast is that we want to treat people with empathy, and that's to treat people the same way you want to be treated. To understand that if they're Black, if they're white, if they're Mexican, if they're Korean, if they're Chinese, if they're Russian, they have no say so in that. Okay, so if they're male or they're female or whatever, I wouldn't want to be treated a certain way by women because I'm a Latino Mexican male, and so I shouldn't be treating people differently because they're. I mean, obviously you've got to be sensitive about something. I'm not talking about not being sensitive, but I don't want to be treated worse. Let's say that worse than someone else because maybe I don't fall into the same socioeconomic status as some other people. You know, I'm a missionary here. Like, money is not my primary concern. So some people might say I don't have X, Y, and Z, and maybe I'm not at their status, but I don't want to be treated disrespectfully because of that, or that I'm less of a person. You know, I am, and so because of that, I don't want to treat others differently. And so I think it all just comes down to actually just take those two of those three letters, respect and empathy, and if we have that, then I think we can definitely make the world a better place. Those two things.
Yeah, I don't want to disregard the humility, though, because humility is essential to learning. And I think what we need to do is we need to have this humility and say, wait a minute, maybe I don't have it all figured out. Maybe I don't understand racism and prejudice and these issues as well as I thought I did. And maybe I need to listen to these other voices. Maybe there is a reason why some people tweet or run their mouths and they're exposed to consequences. And maybe I think that's a little excessive, but maybe I need to think about the impact their commentary is having on these other people. Because the fact of the matter is, there are places all of us could go and be subjected to these same experiences, and we wouldn't like it if the shoe was on the other foot. And none of us are perfect. As Joslin pointed out, we all live in a fallen world, right? Or as I like to point out, we're all sinners. And as a consequence, if we really had justice, if we really got what we deserved, we wouldn't like it. And we need to think about that, and we need to be more compassionate than,
so true,
towards others. So that's kind of my thing. We need to listen, and we need to be more empathetic, humble, and compassionate. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Josh, you got any last thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think everything you guys are saying, I think you guys are kind of basically saying the same thing, just slightly different. And I think the main theme would be that everyone wants to be respected regardless of
Mhm.
race, religion, gender, sexual orientation.
Mhm.
And I think when we can come to the place of realizing that just because someone's different, it doesn't make them scary, or you don't need to be fearful of the unknown. If we can come to a place of just respecting one another,
Mhm.
regardless if you agree or disagree,
Mhm.
then I think that really will start being that shift. I don't think our society will ever be rid of this, but I
Mhm.
definitely think if we can make that conscious effort to learn from one another, respect one another, and yeah, that's how that shift is going to start. Like that pendulum will start swinging back the other way, and
Mm.
which I think we all want. Ultimately, we all want to be respected and understood. So it's kind of just what I've got for you guys.
We are saying the same. Marshall and I are saying the same thing, but I'm saying it a lot better because I'm better than Marshall.
Well,
And
all right.
I'm a Christian, and Marshall's a heathen atheist. So I definitely am saying it in a lot better way.
Better,
So
right?
anyway,
More
that being
better.
said, much more better. I'm way better. I'm the bestest. So
That's
anyway,
right.
that being said, actually, Marshall and I kind of make fun of each other sometimes because we're trying to show that we can disagree and we can still have respect and we can joke. You know what I mean? Like we can joke with each other and we don't
My
have to take
jokes are
things.
funnier, though. My jokes are actually funny.
They're more funnier. So yeah. With that being said, Joslin, I really want to thank you for your opinion in on this, weighing in, and wow, it's very, very, very eye-opening. And I hope someone watching this just will take a moment to reflect on how little things that they might be doing, intentional or otherwise, could really affect the psyche of other people.
Yeah.
And so I really hope that someone listening to this takes a moment to reflect and pause and say, hey, maybe I need to have some humility here and recognize that I am capable of racism. I may not be overt about it, but I'm a fallen person with sin in their lives. And so that might manifest itself in different ways with different people, whether it's your spouse or children or a significant other. And so with that being said, I truly want to thank you for your time. And I really hope to see you again on the next episode of RAG Podcast. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, Joslin.
Thank you.